My name's Ashley Butenschoen. Welcome to Make It Public. Today I have Kyle Christensen with me, Mayor of Sumas. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you doing, Ashley?
Oh, I'm doing good. So this is our first podcast, so I guess we'll see how I'm doing at the end of this.
That sounds good.
Yeah. So we are just going to take some time and talk about some topics and get some open, raw opinions and see where it takes us. So here in Whatcom County, we've got, looks like, free beer if you get vaccinated, or free beer if you get a vaccine at participating businesses. So do you know any businesses participating in this yet?
I don't off the top of my head here. I do know that the concern I have with this is, if you're offering that for free, I feel that if people wanted the vaccine, they would have been lined up to get it themselves. So I definitely see a difficulty when you have government or private businesses trying to promote this idea rather than just letting people make their own decisions.
Right. So we've got incentivizing is what we call it. Kind of seems like bribing us to do it.
Correct.
I have a problem with the push that we've seen from the government and from Facebook and Instagram and Amazon, Starbucks. I mean, everybody has just jumped in on this game of, are you vaccinated? Get vaccinated. Celebrate that you're vaccinated. I've never seen anything in my lifetime. So I'm 35. So I could be wrong. It could have happened before in the U.S., but I've never seen in my lifetime something pushed so hard from everywhere. And to me, I'm not saying there's an ulterior motive, but why? My question is why? Why such the big push on this? And like you said, I think the people who wanted this vaccine have gotten it. Now, I do think there are people who want to vaccinate their children. So maybe not all of their children have been vaccinated yet. But I think adults, some of them might be still on the fence. But I think a lot of them, I don't think free beer is going to incentivize people to go get it. And I'm wondering, so our breweries and our restaurants, they're already struggling. And now the government wants them to give away free alcohol, which is the way they make money. So what do you think?
Well, I think that this is, you get on very risky ground when you have the government promoting, this type of a program. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the future there was a push from local government officials to actually incentivize in a way that is actually dollar money. Mm-hmm. I don't think when you start here with you have businesses providing incentives, I think very close behind you could run into where the government is starting to do some of this as well with taxpayer money. So then you get into an even bigger issue.
Right.
Another thing I would mention is there's always been, and I know that local government even has been promoting vaccines and using taxpayer dollars to do that. And again, I have a problem with that. We have, everybody's already burdened with a lot of taxes, and here you have the government overstepping and promoting the vaccines and using taxpayer money to do that. And my question would be, what's next? Where do you stop with that? Are we going to start doing that with abortions? As soon as government starts deciding what's best for the people in America, and even here locally, it just really, I have a lot of questions and concerns that come with that.
Right.
So, yeah.
And what's funny is this is a more liberal side of things. Not everyone who believes the vaccine is the way to go is on the liberal side, but this is the liberal side of government pushing this. And it's funny because you mentioned abortion. Well, with abortion, it's my body, my choice. What happened here? Why is it not our choice anymore? And yeah, I mean, and there are employers who are offering bonuses to their employees who are getting the vaccine.
Yeah, boy, you're exactly right, Ashley. It's like once you start this trend of government getting involved in these type of issues, what's to stop the government to continue to push that envelope farther and farther? And that's my concern is, I'm not an advocate for abortion, but you bring up my body, my choice. At some point we're going to have to decide when can people use common sense and have their freedoms and liberties back to make their own decisions? I think of the phrase, be careful if ever anybody ever shows up and from the government and says, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And I think we have to be really watchful when we get into these kind of situations. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's starting to create, well, we already have a huge divide in this country. So it's creating even more of a divide when our president says it's time to unite and everybody come together, and that's how we're doing things now. And now we're spreading that gap even further.
Yep.
And I just don't see how forcing people and not giving them the choice. I mean, our governor just said, your ticket to freedom is a vaccine.
Yep.
Now, I thought we lived in a free country.
Yes, exactly.
But apparently in Washington, it's like a whole different set of rules. And we're not free in Washington. So, I think, we can get to the vaccine passports, but I think it's time for people to push back on this, because you have the right to get vaccinated, you have the right to wear a mask. But on the flip side, you have a right to do neither of those. And so what do you, as an elected official, what would you tell people? Who should they contact? What should they do in a preemptive strike of the vaccine passports, which we know are coming?
Well, I would say contact your local elected officials and the state. There's the legislature makes decisions, and really you have to do something. And that's where I know a lot of people, and I hear these comments, well, the government's going to do whatever they're going to do. But we need to be involved. Everybody needs to be involved. Nobody can sit back and say somebody else is going to advocate for my rights. And so I would say just start contacting your elected officials and telling them your concerns about your freedoms and liberties. And then the second thing would be, coming, with the primary and then the November election, is vote for people that are going to stand up to protect your rights and your liberties. And again, I hear it over and over again. Well, I'm not going to do it. My vote doesn't count, and everybody's vote counts. And if nobody does anything, we're going to be in a position where this just continues to go on and on and on. And I think that elected officials need to stand up and do what's right and not necessarily what culture dictates, because that's what we see a lot of. There's a lot of elected officials that believe the same way I do,
right,
but they stay silent, whether they're just wanting to get more votes for the next time they run for office, or if they're just afraid to stand up for what they believe in. I think we need to work on unity. You'll hear that from me as we keep talking, is we need to bring people together, unity, and this divides us. Everybody has a right to choose to get the vaccine, and like you mentioned, they have a right to choose to wear a mask. I'm totally fine with that, but don't start forcing that on people. And with the vaccine card, we've heard about, well, you'll be limited on where you can travel to, if you don't have this vaccine card. Again, that concerns me, because now you're requiring it, and we're just going down the wrong path, to be honest.
Right, and on the subject of travel, if a country that you're traveling to, they decide to make it a requirement, that's on that country, right? Like we travel and we have to get malaria or whatever. But here, to tell us that we have to be vaccinated to go, what if we want to be vaccinated to go to New York?
Yep.
What I mean? That's wrong.
Yep.
And to get on an airplane to be vaccinated, that's wrong.
Yep.
And when the airlines start dictating what we put in our own body, we've got a problem, I think.
Correct.
So, back to the elected officials, you're right. People say, my vote doesn't really matter. Now, in the presidential election, I can kind of get where people feel that, even though it does matter. But locally, it matters more than ever. We had Wood Duck Erickson he won by 43 votes or 40 something votes. That's a neighborhood, and a very small neighborhood.
Yes.
And so when we think our vote doesn't count, we're wrong. It can matter so much, and especially here in local elections. So you should get to know, we just had filing week last week, and you should really get to know all those people. Yep. Read the voter pamphlet, but once you read that pamphlet, dig deeper, go on social media, start asking them questions, start poking at them to see what you get.
I totally agree. And it's everybody's responsibility. What's hard for me is to hear people sit back and complain and not be part of the solution.
Right.
We all have to be part of the solution, because it can't just be a few people that are going to make this change happen. And like we've seen before, there's been some tight elections in the last year or two where it's could have gone either way. And so, yeah, I just echo it. I love to see people get involved.
Right. And I think because we have some really big county council elections coming up, and it really does sway either way. And we've had the renewal of the moratorium for Cherry Point over and over and over again, and that's important. We've got a lot of things. There's a lot of money being spent right now for the CARES Act dollars. And kind of like we were talking about the messaging, I know that the county council has spent over $200,000 of CARES Act dollars, which are really tax dollars.
Yep.
And they've spent that, what they say, informing and educating the public. But I recently had a conversation with a couple people in the health industry, and it's very one-sided education. There's no warnings about the vaccine or shot, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
It's a very one-sided thing. So, I don't know, that money that's being spent, do you feel it's been spent wisely, or could it have been?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say I think I mentioned this before, but it's like if you have to try to sell a product to that extent, then you've gone too far, especially from the government side. So to answer your question, I would say no, I don't believe that is money well spent at all. I think that there's a lot of other things that money could be used on. And especially with all the businesses that have been affected by this shutdown, you can start to talk about all the economic impacts that we still haven't even seen the end of yet until everything gets opened up without any restrictions.
Right. And, I think the other thing is that we need to be aware of what's going on within our local government. And sometimes it can be overwhelming to sit there and listen to the county council meetings or the health board meetings and stuff, but really to be aware, because we have an executive who is spending a lot of money, and he's always asking for more and more and more money or authorization to spend money. So we need to be keeping him accountable. We should keep everyone accountable, but there's a lot of money being funneled different ways right now. So I actually have a question for you as far as vaccinating children and going back to school. Do you think with the vaccine being still experimental and for an emergency authorized use only, do you think it's wise to give it to children 15 and under?
I don't. Appreciate the question. Last time I checked, we have over 250,000 plus people in Whatcom County. And I think it was a couple weeks ago, so this isn't current information. But we've had, I believe, less than 90 people that have died from COVID. And you could make the case that a majority of those have been individuals that are elderly with underlying conditions and other medical problems. So COVID is serious. It does affect certain people. But to get back to your question, I don't feel that it's wise to vaccinate children because, again, last time I checked, and it's been a couple weeks, I failed to check it before I came here, but there wasn't anybody in Whatcom County that has died under the age of 40. Right. And so when you look at that statistic, I would ask, why would you use this vaccine and force kids to have it or even to get it when they aren't at risk of dying from this or even being hospitalized? Their immune systems are able to fight the coronavirus if they get it. And I think there's a lot of doctors that feel the same way, but their voices aren't being heard based on, I feel, an agenda that's being pushed. Right. And so yeah, I would say I would not, and I'm not going to advocate that my kids get it. Right. So we're going to be one of those people that say it's just too risky. And again, I say that, and we have statistics and facts that show that children are not at risk, like the elderly population
right, that's the science.
Yep, that's the science. People love to point to science. Yeah. I love science. Let's look at the facts. I don't know what what the percentage is, but if 250,000 divided by less than 90, and that's over a year and 3 months or so, that's not much.
Right.
And I've had good friends that have gotten it and gotten very sick and been hospitalized, but they've all had those underlying conditions. Right. And so
because I know quite a few people who have had it and have been like, oh, like the flu or it's less than the flu.
Yep, exactly.
And I have a family member who's had the vaccine and got sick after the second dose. So I think, I wonder, so here's what I wonder. I see there are school districts starting to put out emails that, oh, the vaccine's available, start vaccinating your kids so we can go back to school and be fully open in September. We could probably vaccinate under 12, which vaccinating 5 and 6-year-olds, that's terrifying. We don't know what this vaccine is going to do long term.
Yep.
And I don't even know how they, I mean, I guess they have to do trials, and I don't know who's like, hey, I volunteered to have my 5-year-old be tested on this. That's scary enough.
Yeah.
But I think that, what happens when the school is advertising this and telling people to do it, and people start getting sick because they're saying, our insurance won't allow us to let kids go back to school without a mask on. That's their reason. Okay, well, we just saw that employers can be held liable if they make their employees get vaccinated and they get injured. So what about the students who get injured? What happens to the schools then? Have they even thought about it? I
don't think they've thought that far ahead. And something else to remember is in the beginning, before they started even administering these vaccines, the government basically gave them a no liability stamp of approval.
Right.
So let's say, and I know a lot of people that have gotten the vaccine and have felt sick, whether it's been after the first dose or second dose.
Right.
And they were sick for days, like just down and out. So what happens, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years from now, and all of a sudden they realize that by rushing this vaccine, there was a lot of negative side effects. And who's going to be held accountable to that? It won't be the big pharmaceutical companies because the government has put them in a position where they're not held accountable. And anytime you give somebody a stamp of approval and say you're not liable for anything that happens, that should have been a red flag for all of us, because being a business owner, I know that there's consequences. I need to do a good job. And if I just do whatever I want to do with no consequences, then where's the accountability? And so that's another concern I have.
Right. And I just actually last night watched a documentary about Big Pharma and opiates and how when they're approved and everything is actually in the okay and good, there's still so much fraud and crime going on. Mm-hmm. And now you look at something like this where they're saying, okay, well, this vaccine's actually kind of only effective for like 6 months. So you're telling me everyone on the planet needs to be vaccinated every 6 months for 2 vaccines. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So Big Pharma, and these vaccine companies, they're making some money.
Big money.
Yeah.
Big money.
So I wonder, maybe that's why there's so much advertising. I don't know. It's a question.
It's a question.
And I just want to say that 10, 15, maybe not take that long, like 5 years down the road, there might be a documentary about why such a big push. Yeah. And, and it bothers me that the CDC seems to be Fauci's advertising agency, and things can flip on a dime. I mean, one day we're double, triple, quadruple masking, and the next, you can take that thing off if you've been vaccinated.
Yeah.
So, I think it's getting to be a bit crazy and not necessarily following science, but maybe a little bit more political science.
I would say so, in my opinion.
Let's look at, how about we talk a little bit about vaccine passports. So I don't know how many of Governor Inslee's press conferences you watch. They're fun. So he, in the last one I watched, I mean, there's ones of him signing bills and doing all sorts of stuff. But the last one I watched was talking about the masking and, only people who have been vaccinated are going to take off the mask. I was thinking this is all kind of like a bait and switch. I think they know full well that people who have not been wearing masks are still not going to wear them. Only a few of the vaccinated are going to take it off. Because, again, I said I have a family member who's vaccinated, and I called her, and I was like, hey, you can take your mask off. You don't have to wear it anywhere anymore. Yeah. And, unless you're in, health care situation or airplanes. And she comes up to where I live, and she's still wearing it. I said, why are you wearing that thing? Take it off. And she's like, but there's people still wearing it. It doesn't matter. You don't have to. And so, so those people, I mean, there are a lot less. I went into a local restaurant here, I won't name it, because it was packed in Bellingham. and nobody was wearing a mask.
Yep.
And some of even the people working there were not wearing a mask. And I think that there is some taking the mask off for people who are vaccinated, but I think it's more people who aren't vaccinated because the others have been trained and now they're comfortable.
Yep.
And so I'm wondering now, as we start questioning and checking people, because right now you can just say, oh, I've been vaccinated, and they don't care. But they're going to start checking. And when they start checking, because he said, not for now, we're not going to enforce it. For now.
Yep.
So when they do start enforcing it, is it going to be left to the local towns? Is it going to be statewide? How do you think they're going to roll that out?
I think they'll do it statewide because I think there's a lot of local governments and local leaders that will not go along with the state's recommendations. So I really think that they'll want to keep control, and we've seen that with Governor Inslee still, holding on to his emergency powers. I don't see the state giving up any control. I think they have the control, and it's not in their best interest to let go. And I think that they'll continue to try to push agendas that we've seen over the last year and a half. I really feel that this, we talk about vaccines, we talk about masks, but the government has gotten so much control because of those issues in other areas as well. So there's a bigger picture, and I wish they would, and I would love for them to give a local control to local cities or counties, but I just don't see that happening.
Right. So, as if they roll out, so say tomorrow Inslee signs another order and says that you have to carry a vaccine card, vaccine passport with you to show your vaccination status, which is scary. That's like scary to even think of. And I mean, we know in Eastern Washington immediately there's going to be people bucking that, or elected officials will be like, well, not here.
Yeah.
So what do you think he'll do?
Well, that's a good question because, at some local cities that I know of, there hasn't been enforcement of masks. People that want to wear them, they wear them, and people that don't, they don't. And so I really think that, again, the state will use different avenues where, before where they've used the different departments within the state to enforce, like LNI. So I see them using those avenues to try to enforce. But again, I think that there's going to be a lot of pushback when it comes to that. When people start looking at where we're at today and what we've been told over the last year and a half. And I think people are becoming more aware as this has gone on and seen things that they're not happy with the way that the government has been involved. And I've always been an advocate for government is there to protect your freedom and liberties,
right?
Because we live in a free country, and we have seen that big shift to where now the government controls so many things. I don't see them giving up that control.
No.
And that's where voting for people that are going to stand up for us is so important.
Right.
Because that's how you change it. I don't think Governor Inslee's going to wake up one morning and totally change everything he's done. I think he's going to continue to use his powers in a way that is not healthy for our communities. Right.
So, I'm wondering the divide that has already kind of been put in our community, especially in Whatcom County, because I've left Whatcom County, and Washington State as a whole is pretty hot-tempered and divisive. But then when I go outside of, to be honest, California is freer than we are. And I always felt California was a little more liberal.
Yeah.
And, I can go to, even in LA and Beverly Hills, and it's kind of crazy to me. I feel like Washington is like another country, and then it's even worse when you get to Whatcom County. And I don't know if it's the lack of vitamin D or what it is here, but there's just this massive divide. And do you think that vaccine passports will deepen that and make it worse?
Oh, for sure. There will definitely be a divide. The longer this goes on, the more you have people fighting amongst each other on what's right and what's wrong. And I think the problem is we've been lied to, and we're starting to believe that truth is relative when there's absolute truth. Something's either right or wrong. And we've gone to this point to, well, if it's true for you, then it's true, but something else is true for me. And we've got to come back to the basic principle that something's either right or wrong, something's either helpful or not helpful. And people have to come to that realization and use common sense again. It's really hard to be a parent right now because you have all of this pressure from government saying you have to do this, you have to vaccinate your kids. Well, at what point are they going to start telling all of the parents exactly what they need to do with all their medical things? See, there's got to be people that are willing to stand up and say, hey, I want my rights to be able to choose what kind of vaccinations I'm giving my kids. But if the government right now, I should say, our state, if they continue to push this like they are, and school districts and elected officials buy into this, pretty soon we aren't going to have those personal liberties at all. And again, it comes back to how long will people stay silent, or when will they be willing to step up and say, enough's enough. I want to be able to have some freedoms to make these decisions.
Right. Well, and I don't know. I think that I'm also worried because I've heard this talk about sheriffs so we elect them right now, but I've heard this talk about in Washington State how there are those who want to appoint sheriffs. And even Sheriff Elfo kind of warned on that. And I'm wondering too, because I know, the sheriff can appoint citizens to arrest, posse or whatever. And so I'm wondering if they can appoint a sheriff, then as an appointed sheriff still have all of those same rights to do that. And then where are we when we're forced to show papers of where we can and cannot be, what we can and cannot do? And then we've got citizens who have been given the right to arrest us for those things. That's a dangerous path, and it sounds kind of crazy. However, it's kind of knocking at the door.
Yeah, I would say any time that you leave it up for an appointment, then you're at the liberty of, whatever the highest ranking county officials making a decision on who is replacing the sheriff as needed. And I would hate to see that. I think that it's important we have elected officials in those sheriff positions, so that the people actually have a voice versus we've seen this at a national level, state level, local level, where you have elected officials that are abusing their power. And so we don't need, and I can say this as mayor, I don't need more power. And people abuse the administrative authority they have so often to push their own agendas, when really, when I took office and swore my oath, it was to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of Washington. And I think as elected officials, we get way off track when we start promoting or are not doing our jobs because we're trying to go along with culture and what the mainstream media is feeding you or whatever it might be.
The perception of reality.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think elected officials, a lot of them, not all of them, forget that they represent the people who elected them. And so I think that's something to remember when you get into office, that you need to represent those who have elected you and pay attention to the people who are speaking to you. Is there any last thought you have on the vaccine passports?
I don't. I would just not be for them. I don't think it's good for our economy, and it would just further divide the people in our county. Yeah. So I'm not for them at all.
Okay. Here in Washington State, we're pushing towards the critical race theory. And I don't know, I'm not someone who's dove real deep into it. From the little bit I know, and after this last year and the end of the beginning of lockdown, end of 2019, early 2020, I have been homeschooling my kids. I chose the route of having the most control as a parent. It's not technically homeschool, but it's through the school system. I get to choose the curriculum that is approved by the state. And now that we're looking at critical race theory, from the small amount that I know, I've decided, nope, we're going to do this again next year and maybe for the rest of forever.
Yes.
So, and I have 4 children, ranging from ages 16 to 6. And I think it's scary. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about it and what you know.
Oh, absolutely. So I have a lot of concerns about critical race theory, and there's other things that tie into that, like intersectionality and hegemony, which is really based on what you look like, what your choices are, how you live. And so let's just talk about Dr. Vodi Balcom does a great job of discussing this issue, and he has a lot of YouTube videos. And so I want to give him credit because I've really learned a lot as I've researched more about critical race theory and have seen the dangers that come with it. So when I was a kid, we were taught you treat everybody the same. And in fact, the Bible says, love your neighbor as yourself. And so we've gone way from that type of teaching our kids and our culture to now with this critical race theory coming on the stage. Now I feel we're in a point to where it's even causing more division,
right?
Because now we're looking at you're dealing with white fragility, and we need to elevate this race because this race has been oppressing this race in the past, and so it becomes this power struggle. And to boil it down, critical race theory is trying to shift that power from, let's say, from white people to black people, or it could be Asian people to Hispanic. I mean, it works for any people group. But the thing that divides everybody is you're promoting critical race theory is like makes you feel bad if you're a certain race. So you've heard the term white fragility. Mm-hmm. And basically what that is us being white people, we have these genes that we're inherently racist and not even knowing it. Mm. And the tough part about this is, again, what this is doing is saying that instead of love your neighbors yourself, treat everybody with respect and don't treat them differently based on what they look like or how they act. And I think the tough part about this is people have bought into this critical race theory, and I really believe people aren't educated enough. They just think it's all about racism when really it's
inequality.
Deep inequality, and it's rooted in so much more. And I would just, there's so much research that could be done. And I think people need to educate themselves, and we need to stop promoting critical race theory and actually start promoting just being kind to one another. And something else that I've learned is you hear this term, we need to be colorblind. I would say the exact opposite. We need to celebrate everybody's race. God created all different colors and types of people and groups of people. We shouldn't be being colorblind. We should be celebrating everybody's differences.
Right.
And so it's the way you look at it. And critical race theory just dismantles at its very core, makes you judge somebody else. And if you ever have to feel guilty because you're one race instead of another, then I would argue that's the wrong system we should be following. You should feel good about whoever you are. You are what you are. I didn't have a choice to be white.
It's the opposite of equality, though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It ends up causing this division. And so that's where I feel that the critical race theory, the intersectionality, and the hegemony, we can talk about that a little bit. So how all those line up is, if you're white, then you have a certain amount of privilege. If you're male, you have a certain amount of privilege. If you're heterosexual, then you have a certain amount of privilege. And it keeps going on down the line based on your sexual orientation. Are you able-bodied? So, you keep going down the line, and if you have all of these qualities, then you're the bad guy, and you should be feeling guilty as I walk around based on the way I choose to live and based on the way I look like. And so that's where I feel we need to stop this, and you look at the state has passed this, the Senate bill for the early learning and education. And it's scary. And I think, again, people are just taking this and nobody's speaking up because they don't want to be labeled as a bad guy. So just saying what I've just said, people will label me as a racist. I'm the farthest thing from a racist. I have family and friends of every race, and I love everybody. I don't judge people based on what they look like.
No, we just love people.
I love people.
Yeah.
But again, people will take that and say, aha, so because you're white and a male, I mean, it goes on down the line. So anyway, so I'm very passionate about this because it's so negative to our culture.
Right.
And people have to wake up to it and realize what this is and what this will do moving on to the future. We need unity. And you don't get unity by dividing. And if you start researching this, there's so many things. We could talk for hours about all the different things that this touches on. They're not good.
Right. And so it says the bill requires all school boards to adopt cultural competency standards for the board member training and board policies. So it's no longer left to the school board.
Yeah.
They've just took it away.
Yep.
And so we can't locally, we don't get to vote on this. So we've got the new sex education bill, which passed. And so we've got how now they're teaching our kids, I'm going to take a step back first. So we've got government and childcare, and they're trying to increase that here in Whatcom County, and by affordable childcare. So we're going to spend a bunch of money and give you affordable childcare. Well, okay, so we're taking the kids out of the home as early as possible to feel like we're indoctrinating them. And I mean, that's how I feel.
Yep.
And so it's from before they can go to preschool. So we're going to go to childcare, and then they're going to preschool, and then they're going to kinder, because preschool now in the public school system, and then we have kindergarten is when we're going to start teaching about sex education, which is mind blowing to me.
Yeah. Because
kids are super curious, but the second you open that up, they're more curious. Mm-hmm. And kids like to, when they're curious, they'll experiment. I mean, do we really need kindergartners experimenting in sex?
Yes.
No,
exactly.
We don't.
You don't.
And yeah, so I think there's all this education stuff being pushed in at this time where it's like, the government just has our best interests, and they're keeping us safe, and now white silence equals violence, so we got to teach this. And further division. So we've got vaccines and masks, and now it's education, and it's just deepening the divide. Yep. Do you think this will hurt? Because I know registrations in the public school system have been hit pretty hard during lockdown, and I know Linden Christian has had to add a night school. I think they need to add 2 more campuses.
Yeah.
But do you think this is going to further hurt the registration into the public school system?
Oh, for sure. And I think the reason is, you touched on it, not only now is critical race theory going to be being taught in the public school system, but you'll also have, like you said, sex education at a very, very young age. And I'm so surprised how there's not more outrage from parents that are realizing that at kindergarten, they're going to start to be indoctrinated with things that are way, way too much for them to be talking about. There's a time and a place to have that conversation. And you brought up a good point. Why are we at where we are today in our culture? And I think we've seen this over time. If our kids are being taught certain things, that are over time, if you start teaching them that young, they're going to continue to go away from traditional values and not support our freedoms and liberties because they're being taught this is the way you should live. And I'll just say for myself, I obviously I'm a conservative, and I hold to, traditional Christian values. And anytime you start to see that is being silenced and in fact the opposite is being promoted.
Right.
So you see that at the family unit where it's not popular anymore to have, it used to be the family unit was praised if you had a father and a mother and kids. You had a great unit and they function well, but now everything is being kind of blown up, and now the government wants to be teaching our kids instead of parents involved. Or
there's no parenting anymore.
There is no parenting anymore.
Why, I'm not sure why they call us parents.
Yeah.
I mean, we're kind of just footing the bill.
And what scares me about that, the more government control there is the more we get towards socialism or communism. The bigger steps, people are like, oh, that'll never happen. But you got to look at the little steps it takes. If you can get the younger generations to buy into your agenda, then you will end up being able to change that whole country. And that's what worries me. And I think it's around the corner. And I think as a Christian, I should be concerned because, it affects your freedom to worship,
Right.
And what you can say and how you should act. And we should have the freedom to do all these things and raise our kids the way we want. And
and we saw the freedom of religion. I mean, we saw that being tested during COVID when they said you can't be at church, you can't sing.
Yep.
And to me, it was kind of like testing, are the churches going to behave? Are they going to obey? And most of them did.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me wonder, and I would ask some pastors, that's not even a hard test. When the hard test comes, are you going to be brave to stand up?
Yeah.
And so again, I'm a Christian as well, so I can I think I see some of these things coming and some of these tests coming, and you're right, this generation that's coming up. When I'm downtown and there's kids in front of the police station screaming Jesus was a communist.
Yeah.
They think communism is the way to go. It's the cool thing.
Yep.
And it's the trendy thing to do. So so now I wonder, with public registration declining, a lot of people want vouchers for education and they want to be able to choose. And again, choice is not something that we have in this current state of anything.
Yes.
And so I wonder if it dwindles down enough, will they force us to put our kids in public school?
Boy, that's a good question. And again, it's a scary world when you even have to think that could be possible. Mm-hmm. But I can see where there will be a push because, again, once government has control over a certain area, they're very reluctant to give it up unless there's a change of leadership. And I would say I can see them trying to push that, but I still think that, again, people need to stand up for their choice to be able to educate their kids the way they want. And you can keep going to our previous discussion. Parents should also be able to make those medical decisions instead of the government as well. So
right.
At what point are parents and people going to stand up and say, I want to be able to make these decisions no matter what the government says? But I can definitely see them or incentivizing, having kids go to a public school system. And I want to be clear that there's some public school systems, even though they're being taught this, some kids come out and they do really well. And I know there's different things, there's homeschooling, there's Christian schools, there's private schools, there's public schools. And I think parents need to be able to make those best decisions for themselves, what's best for their family. And so I hold to, if the government comes in and says all of a sudden you can't do this or you can't do that, I have a big problem with that because mm-hmm. then at what point are we not even acting as parents anymore?
Right. I agree with you. And I feel like it's slippery slope here in Washington, heading that way. And it seems to be that Inslee is doing a lot of things under this cover of his emergency executive orders, which in essence we have given him.
We have. We have ourselves to blame. And now how do we fix it?
Right.
You have to vote for people that are going to stand up to and change that legislation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So anything else about the critical race theory that you want to talk about? I know you said go on forever, but what is something you would tell people, that's most, I don't know, it's scary and the most concerning thing, in the simplest of terms, what's the scariest thing? Your child's going to come home,
Yep.
In Linden. I know a teenager who this year, before this was signed, was asked to rank her white privilege. And she's half white, half Asian, I believe. And so she was asked to rank it, and then they needed to write about it. And let me just tell you, if that came home with my child, the superintendent lives on my block. So there is no way would I be quiet about that. I know parents need to stand up and say this is enough. You can't teach my kid this. A lot of times the superintendents don't even know what's going on in the classroom.
For sure.
Sometimes the principals don't even know what's going on in the classroom. So with that already being in place in Linden, you know, what?
Oh, yeah, there you go. That's a great example, because just because somebody is a certain race, then they had to answer those kind of questions. I'll go back to my same thing I kind of led with. We need to get back to where we are, no one, no matter what the color of their skin, should feel guilty about being who they are. And critical race theory is all about causing division and having a power struggle to try to equal out the power. I say let's focus on the unity and let's treat each other the way that we should be treated, or we want to be treated ourselves. And that's really where the problem is. And if anybody listening doesn't get anything else, the main thing is if you want unity, don't listen to what the government is saying about this critical race theory, because it only will cause division, and you will continue to see that. And in a way, it drives a wedge in, and they'll say, well, we're trying to bring unity. I would ask, give us evidence of unity because of this theory and this legislation. And we have to do a better job of kindly speaking up for truth, and we need unity, which is being respectful of each other and not judging people based on the way they look or even the way they act. People deserve to be treated with respect.
If I said I was proud to be white, even though I'm not, I mean, it's just a light colored skin. I mean, how many of us really know like what we have in us? But if I said that, I would totally be a racist.
Yes.
Yep. But if you're anything but white, you can be proud to be that. So I think that it's scary for me to think of what my kids are going to have to deal with because they're white.
Yeah. This is a scary thing, and people need to educate themselves and turn off the news and actually do research on their own. Because critical race theory is based on Marxism. It really came out of, you hear the term cultural Marxism. We all know who Karl Marx was. He was not a person that I would hold up as a figure for my kids to look up to based on what he believed and how he acted. So it's a scary thing.
And in some states, they've made it illegal, I think, right? They've said that, no, you're not going to teach this in the schools.
Yeah. I would love to see Washington take a stand on this issue, but as we know... I think
we'll have 4 more years before that happens at least.
We'd have to vote somebody in to get this change to happen.
Yeah, so as we talk kind of about the divide going on in our society, division seems like coming from everywhere. We've got more mostly liberal thinking that defunding the police is the right thing to do. We're supposed to police ourselves in our own communities and no police. So what's your take on that? Do you think that there should be some police reform, a national database? What's your stance on all of this?
You know, we've seen just in the last year with the riots that we've seen and the lawlessness as a result of a lot of the racial issues that have come up. And I feel that, you know, these law enforcement officers should have nothing but support from us, and they've come under a bad light because, and we could even say it, I believe that 99% of the people that wear the uniform that work for us and protect us are good, decent men and women who we should be supporting. And you see this defund the police movement, and I see where we'll cut the funding and lessen the amount, which then causes a safety issue. So I would say that as a general rule, what we've seen is I have a lot of concerns about reform and policing ourselves, because if history has taught us nothing, you could see we need to have people in place to serve and protect us. So this idea of we'll just police ourselves, I don't know where there's ever been a successful situation where that's actually happened. And I'm very concerned because we continue to see a lot of good law enforcement people leaving the profession and retiring because of this push to defund, and then they have less backup, which causes safety issues. And we're taking away all of the tools that they use every day, or that they could use, like use of force, which is a really tough one, where people are like, well, you can't do this to protect yourself. And so as we put more restrictions on these wonderful men and women that are just trying to protect us, I'm very concerned about their ability to do it. And since I've been in law enforcement in the past, people tend to be able to sit back and judge and say, well, they shouldn't have to be able to use this type of use of force to gain control in a situation. But I can tell you firsthand that when I've been in a struggle for my life against somebody who wanted to do me harm, I didn't need people sitting back saying, well, you shouldn't be able to do everything you can to get control of the situation. We should be doing a better job, and we should be supporting them in whatever they need. And it's just been saddening to me over the last year with all of the riots that have been allowed to happen, and then all of the negative publicity that police have gotten when, like I said, 99% of them do a great job, and the other 1%, they should be held accountable. But we should have a respectful view of law enforcement, and we've lost that, and that's very saddening to me. So,
and with the George Floyd story, it seems that we are now celebrating and making martyrs out of someone who is breaking the law, who was high on drugs. And, I haven't followed that story in every detail, but it seems like we are now making martyrs and heroes out of criminals to make villains out of those who protect and serve.
I would agree. And you can, even people are unwilling to take a stand and say, if somebody breaks the law, it doesn't matter what race you are. It doesn't matter what your personal preferences are. We have places and we have systems and we have law enforcement that is there to protect and serve the general public. And so I totally agree with you. It's like there's a shift. Our officers shouldn't have to decide whether they're going to protect themselves or protect others based on the color of the person that is that they're dealing with right now, that is breaking the law, not following instructions. And we do a huge disservice. And I challenge anybody who disagrees with me to put themselves in a situation, a life and death situation. We can even do scenarios and have them make decisions, spur of the moment, when it's your life or the life of somebody breaking the law. And that's where people don't understand that we need good law enforcement to make good decisions, but they shouldn't have to be second guessing what they're doing out there based on what somebody looks like. If you break the law, there's going to be consequences. And that's something we should be telling our kids. Hey, if you don't do what you're told to do, there's consequences.
Yeah, your actions have consequences.
If you take those actions and consequences away, then that's where we are today with a lot of people that are pushing this agenda of police reform, and we got to limit all the amounts. And I've seen some statistics, and there are still more white law enforcement officers that are killed by black people, but we don't want to talk about that because it doesn't help our agenda. Mm-hmm. And so, again, you got to be really careful on where you're getting your information, because, the general media pushes this agenda as well. Because
but if you're a police officer, if you're in uniform, the color of your skin doesn't matter. So you could be racist even if you're Hispanic or African American. I mean, and so it's crazy. It is a perception of reality that's put on TV and social media, and really, I mean, if you look at influencers, you look at how they're putting this perception of reality out there. They're letting you see what they want you to see, what they want you to see, and not the rest of their life. You're seeing this little bubble in this corner of whatever they're doing. And my sister is an influencer. I have seen full well the influencer world every time we go on vacation, every time we do anything. And there isn't that whole story.
Yep.
And so with this, I mean, that's just an influencer. Well, our media, and it goes both ways on doesn't matter if you're watching CNN or Fox News. It goes both ways. They are professionals at perception of reality.
Yep.
And they have a 24-hour news cycle to make things interesting.
Yep.
But if I were to transport myself into this situation, the story is quite different.
Yep.
And I think that people need to remember that just what they read or see, it's not the whole story. It's just what made them click or catch their interest. And it's scary that now, they can burn cities to the ground, get arrested, and get bailed out by public officials. Yep. And so, again, more division, more crazy narrative. And I had a conversation with a female who told me she was homeless, and she was all for policing ourselves and not necessarily taking the police out of the equation altogether, and not necessarily taking guns away from law-abiding citizens, but she was for reform. So, of course, with people who have mental health, we have to call a mental health professional, not the police. And I asked her, well, what happens when that person who, in this scenario, she said, well, they've got a knife and they might be dangerous, but we really should just call the mental health professional and not the police. So what happens when the mental health professional shows up and they're talking to this person and then they're stabbed?
Yeah.
Where's your backup? They're nowhere to be seen because they didn't come.
Yeah.
So what happens then when all your mental health professionals are being, it's not going to happen every time, but they're going to start getting harmed and there's no cops around. Yeah. So what happens? Did we need them?
Yes. See, that's a great example. Is you always need people that are willing to stand up and protect us, and I, like I said, you can also see this with the laws that have been changed, where we, now certain controlled substances, now you don't get, punished like you did before, and so as you continue to lower that bar and hold people less accountable, all you're doing is making the law enforcement's job that much more difficult to keep us safe. Because the answer isn't just to, well, we've got too many people in our jail, so we're just going to lower what we arrest people for or hold people accountable. And at what point do you stop? What is our goal here? I want to live in a safe community. It doesn't matter to me. That should be our number one priority. And that's why, I've always and will always support law enforcement and what they do. And we all need to treat them with respect.
Right. And I don't think this falls on our law enforcement so much as it falls on our elected officials, who the root of the problem, because I don't want to vilify that person who needs help for something that they've got a mental illness. They need help. And yes, Correct. They do need a mental health professional, but defusing that situation and then getting them the help they need. Yep. I think we have really, as a society and as elected officials, have failed on that level big time. And you see that in our community. We have lots of homeless. And our homeless here aren't necessarily from here, but they've heard our homeless benefits are great in Whatcom County. Yes. So they're coming here. So I think this really does fall on our elected officials, mainly in Bellingham. But it's really important to keep the community safe and support and help people and using those resources, but cracking down on the fact that you've got Antifa coming in here and hired people coming in here and using homeless people as pawns for their narrative, moving them to City Hall and doing this and that. It's really important to, as our elected officials, to put their foot down and say, no, we're not going to allow this here in our city.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And it's interesting you bring that up because, I've always, since I've been in office, I've always said that I need to be held to the same standard as everybody else. But what you find in politics is a lot of politicians and elected officials will not hold themselves to the same standard that they're promoting. And so, again, I think that elected officials need to take a stand and do what's right and do it and expect, and everyone should expect, everybody who voted for me should expect me to have my yes be yes and my no be no and not say one thing and do another. Yeah. And I think you see that a lot with elected officials is they will say something to make themselves look good, but then they either won't do anything about it to back up what they believe or the opposite. they don't care.
Right. Well, it's like I'd love to have Mayor Seth Fleetwood come talk to me, because it seems as though Camp 210 was left untouched until his safety was at risk. And in a big way, his safety was at risk. And then it was like, oh, we're going to sweep this now. And I don't know. Again, I don't know all those details. Mm-hmm. I just know what I've been able to read and see. And you know, I think his safety has been at risk, and it's been wrong. People have gone to his house. Yeah. I mean, but I wonder if he hadn't let it go on for so long, if maybe we wouldn't be in this place.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I don't know all the details on that either, but we do know that, you know, people were allowed to, you know, camp on public property.
While all the employees who were in those buildings were at risk, and they just shut the library down.
Yeah, and services were brought in to help accommodate them while they were there.
While they had other resources in the community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I guess my concern is then again is as elected officials, we need to stand up for, don't allow people to do something that's illegal, because if you allow one group and then try to hold another group accountable, you lose all credibility. And you see that you need to stand up for what's right and what is lawful, and you've got to hold the line. But you see people that will, in elected offices, that don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think it's important that when we have laws to uphold them. Thank you, Mayor Christensen, for coming on and with us and talking about some issues. I hope it wasn't too painful. I think it went okay.
No, it was great. Thanks for having me, Ashley. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for listening. Have a great day.